Welcome to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast with Borg, Betz, and a Baller.
Welcome back. It's the 100th episode of the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Borganoni, and it's just Betz with me today.
100 episodes. Most podcasts, and production will give you some sort of special event for 100 episodes, right? Like, it's kind of a big deal. They didn't think we'd make it to 50, Kyle. And then when we got to 75, they were like, there's no way these guys get to 100. Here we are. And corporate said, screw you guys. We're leaving. We're not going to be there for the 100th episode. So just you and me, man. And last year we did this show, just the two of us talking quarterbacks, I believe, as well. So I feel like it made sense just to run it back, talk QBs here for the 100th episode. Kind of fun to think back to the last couple of years of the show and, get to 100 episodes.
I do think quarterbacks is one of those positions that you and I together over the years, we've done a lot of podcasts together. I feel like we've come to an agreement of what actually matters for fantasy and what translates to the NFL. Because you and I look back at a lot of recruiting lists, and I used to be really into high school recruiting. I found it fascinating. And then you look at the best of that group, and almost all of them, 95% of them won't matter at all, like translating to the NFL. And then even of that group, and we'll talk about this year's class, where it's like, how many of these guys will actually matter for dynasty football in 4 years? I mean, that's a big question. Like, how many of these guys even get second contracts in the NFL? And we'll talk about it, but right now, there are 4 guys that seem to be above the rest, and then we'll talk about some deeper names too on this. But it's a good discussion. I felt like the discussion we had a couple years ago about C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young, the things that worked in college and didn't work. Will Levis, remember that conversation of like, okay,
sure do.
I don't know if he sees pressure, and apparently he still doesn't see pressure, and he's going to be out of a job. But I feel like QB scouting is kind of our sweet spot.
It's hard to do, right? I mean, the NFL gets it wrong all the time, right? Number one picks in the NFL fail all the time. But I think what we've kind of come to a conclusion on is just, like you said, trying to find out what actually matters. And for fantasy, it's very obvious. It's, can you run or not? And if you're not going to run, you have to be highly efficient as a passer to matter for us in fantasy, which is obviously what we care about. But thinking about the dynasty landscape at quarterback, I care so much about, are these guys going to start any games as a rookie? Because you've got, I don't know the stat off the top of my head, but you got a stat of like, if you're not starting, 6+, 8+ games, something like that as a rookie, it's like, well, your future in the NFL is not great. And so I want guys that are going to start right away. And I think a lot of the guys we're going to talk about today, I don't even know if they make starts as a rookie at all. So this class is quite weak when you compare it to last year's class, right, where you had Caleb as like the highly coveted guy. He's been the guy for years. Jane Daniels had a really late surge in his career, and obviously we know the story there. Drake May was an awesome prospect. Like, all these dudes, Bo Nix was a huge hit. All these guys you were so excited about. And now it's like, I just hope one of these guys is a starter in 2 years. I would be shocked if we had like more than 3 as starters in 2 years. So I think this year in Superflex drafts, you might get some nice values at quarterback. I don't know that they're going to be home run values like they were last year.
Yeah, and let's not forget, we've had years where the quarterback position was not helpful at all. Like, we had Kenny Pickett one year where he was the only quarterback taken in the first round. Even going back to drafts like 2018, where we had 5 quarterbacks taken in the first round, you go back and you go, okay, so Baker had this crazy route to get where he is now. Sam Darnold, Josh Allen, who also had a crazy route the first 2 years, Josh Rosen, and then some guy taken at the end of the first round named Lamar Jackson. It's like the path for all of those guys was so different. And then you think back to the year with Trevor Lawrence, where we went in and saying, this guy is the prospect. We know he's going to be taken number 1 overall. And so you can have confidence in that. But then the rest of that class was just a mixed bag of, we like Justin Fields as a fantasy quarterback, but his timetable ran out when it was, are you going to start in the NFL? And that's like the thing we have to go back and forth with is what works for the game we play, and then what's going to translate to the NFL for somebody being a signal caller for more than a year and a half, 2 years. I mean, like Will Levis is the example of, okay, he was taken in the second round. We'll see where this goes. But now it's over. He's not going to be a starting quarterback again in the NFL.
Poor Will. just catching strays on a rookie show. And I think too, the other thing with the quarterback position, like landing spot obviously matters. I think a lot of people will say landing spot matters the most for running back. It matters for every spot, of course, depending on which coaching staff you're with and everything. But to quote the great Mike Wright, you want to avoid the turds in the pool. It's hard to go to places as a quarterback and succeed when your play caller changes 3 times your rookie year, your coaching staff gets fired, stuff like that. We saw that with Bryce Young as a rookie. We saw Caleb struggle, right, last year. Even though we love his talent and the tools, like the surrounding environment was just not great. So at quarterback, like I care so much about who you're playing with, who you're throwing to, what the environment is around you to set you up for success in year one. Because unfortunately, NFL teams, they don't give you more than a year and a half. Like Bryce Young was hanging on by a thread, right? And he had a nice final month and a half there to kind of maybe save his job moving forward. We'll see on that. But NFL does not give you much time. And so I care so much about the investment the team makes in you and what they put around you to succeed. And really, you're looking for stability there. We'll see on what the Titans do, number one. We're going to talk about that in a second here. But like, is Callahan the guy in a year, in 2 years? I'm not sure. So there's a lot of moving parts that in real life NFL matter so much for Superflex Dynasty stability at the position of, is this guy even going to start in a year or 2 years? A ton to think about over the next, 6, 7, 8 weeks.
If you want to see all of our rankings, you can get them at ultimatedraftkit.com, part of the Dynasty Pass, which you can have access to right now if you get the UDK Plus. And also, if you order before March 1st, you can get a free entry to win a Listener League spot, which Betz and I have never gotten to be a part of. We are locked out. It's part of our contract that we will never, ever. I mean, every year, you and I, we go back to the table with our agents, collective bargaining agreement, and say, can we get a Listener League spot? And corporate says no. And what's offensive to me is that right now, we mentioned earlier that the Ballers are off this week. They're at FSGA. They're gambling stuff away at, in Las Vegas, not even giving 2 farts about this. At least they could give us a Listener League spot, but they can't even give us that.
Yeah, I just got a text from Mike. He actually said he put your next paycheck on red, and you better hope it hits, brother.
Mike's at the craps tables. Jason is a blackjack guy. He's always been a blackjack guy. I played many a poker game at his house too. So we'll see. Andy is a little bit more conservative. Maybe you know this. Maybe it shocks you, but that's what they're doing right now. But if you want to get in on the lowest price of the UDK Plus, you can go to ultimatedraftkit.com. I'm looking at our rookie rankings right now. I actually had them up on my app earlier. I was making my hot tea before the show, and I was like, let's just make sure that the rankings, the production profile are actually live, and they are live in the app if you want to get them, ultimatedraftkit.com. Let's start off with a question. You and I, we co-host another podcast in the fantasy footballers world, the DFS and betting podcast, where you and I usually talk through the markets and kind of say this is where things are. So this is how betting and the sportsbook world kind of overlaps into Dynasty. And it's not everything, but it is a piece of the puzzle. But I wanted to ask you a couple different questions. I wrote an article called Forecasting for the 2025 NFL Draft, kind of getting a lay of the land of how you and I see these picks and where they go in the draft. So the first question I have for you is really simple. Is Cam Ward the number 1 overall pick? We'll talk about him as a prospect in a second, but right now he's minus 140 on DraftKings Sportsbook to go number 1 overall. It's about a 58% implied odds. So where you're at right now, do you think he goes there? Because there's another market of which team picks number 1, which is kind of crazy to think about, and it's the Titans at minus 295. It's 75%. It's not a lock. They stay there. So is Cam Ward the number 1 overall pick?
So I have this kind of as 50-50 right now because it's quite obvious they need a quarterback, obviously, right? And you might say to yourself, like, you're picking at 1, just take whoever you have highest on your board, just sit there and take them. But when you look at team needs, it's quite a list, right, for the Titans. Like, they've got some studs on defense. They've got some key pieces there. They invested a lot in the, I shouldn't say a lot. They invested in the offensive line last offseason. They could use more offensive line help. Like, they just have so many needs. So I could see them trading down, but I also could see them in a situation where they're like, we want one of Cam or Shedeur. We're not trading down too far because we want to make sure we get one of those guys. You got the Giants kind of hanging out there, right? The Browns need help. So I have it 50-50 right now. So I don't think that I would agree with necessarily with the odds based on the betting market, but I do think he should be the favorite to go, if that makes sense. Just based off the fact that it's so glaringly obvious that this team does need a quarterback. The odds in the betting market did move a ton when the quote from, I think, the new GM was something about, we're not going to pass on a generational prospect here at number one. That was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago at this point. But then people started speculating, like, who is that guy in this class? Is it Abdul Carter? Is it Travis Hunter? Who did he mean by that? And we saw the odds shift quite a bit. So, yeah, I don't know that I would say the minus 140 is right from an odds perspective. I have it more closer to about 50-50. Where do you stand?
Yeah, right now I'm at 45%. So in other words, I would say in all likelihood, he doesn't go number one overall. And, you know, maybe some of it is just connecting too many dots with their new GM, Mike Borgonzi, who, fellow Borg, I got to trust him. But in somebody who's been in an organization that's been as well run as the Chiefs, that's where he was for almost 15 years, he understands the difference in a team's makeup and when you go in on a quarterback. And so I would say it's more likely either that they trade the pick or they take one of these defensive players, Abdul Carter, or if they like Travis Hunter. And that's just my sentiment right now. That can change. We're going to have pro days. We're going to have all that stuff where they go and visit. We'll talk about Cam Ward. I would say any other year, if we were to put Cam Ward in last year's class, I think he'd show up as like 5 or 6 for me. So I don't know if you feel the same way. Like that's where he would have landed in that group.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of going back to, we're going to talk about Ward obviously in a lot of detail today, but like kind of going back to his story of how the NFL viewed him, he thought about coming out after he was at Washington State a couple years ago. And the NFL basically kind of told him like, go back one more year, see if you can get your draft stock better. He was projected as like a fringe day 2 guy by most NFL draft analysts. So obviously the business decision of going back and now maybe being the number 1 overall pick worked out beautifully for him. But yes, the NFL did not love Ward a year ago. Things change obviously with the class and dynamics and that sort of thing. But just for context, yeah, the NFL is obviously now much higher on Cam Ward than they were, 365 days ago.
It is wild to think about some of these prospects and the year that they just happen to come out. Now, some of those people can time the market and figure it out. Like I think, like Dylan Gabriel, did he time the market and say like, I'm just going to stay one more year just because, and to set a bunch of records. But it is interesting to see when they would come out, when they wouldn't. So right now, I would put the odds at, I think it's more likely that he's not the number 1 overall pick and they go elsewhere. Let's keep going. We have some other questions that I wrote up in the article. One of them is just really simple. Does Ashton Jeanty go in the top 10? And if I would ask you this question a month ago, I think everybody would have had some steam and said, oh yeah, this is where it's good. Now it's kind of heading the other direction right now where he's kind of more in that top 15 range. And I've even seen some mocks where he drops to 20. So I don't know. What's your feel right now of Ashton Jeanty in the top 10?
He does feel a lot like Bijan's draft projection of a couple years ago. Not saying that they're the same player or that comparison, but just like how the NFL viewed him of like, this guy is definitely going in the top 20 picks, but it's hard to slot him at a spot because you have to use a premium draft pick on a running back, which a lot of people don't love to do. But the context around this year's class is that generally it's pretty weak in the first round. So you will see a lot of teams, I think, take best player available, whether that's a Jeanty or Tyler Warren or whoever it is. So I think Jeanty has a chance to go, like you said, very good chance top 15. I think a pretty good chance top 12. And I could see him, much like Bijan, sneak into the top 6 to 8 picks, depending on the team that's there, if there's any movement in the draft order. But you go down the list of like, once you get past 4 or 5, there's a lot of teams that need running back and some teams that, would like to build their identity around the run game. So I think Jeanty is definitely live to go top 10. I have it right now kind of handicapped at like 47%, but certainly top 20 is a lock in my opinion. And I think top 15 is a very, very strong bet.
Yeah, if you want to go to sites like Grinding the Mocks, which is a great one that kind of aggregates all the different mocks out there and kind of says, here's the average where they're going. He was at 11.3, so pretty much right on that cusp of a top 10 pick. And I've seen from a lot of different people, maybe you've done some reading, some bathroom reading, whatever, where there's a difference between how many players are mocked in the first round, 32, and then how many first round grades either scouts have or teams have. And this year, I saw someone throw out there like, I only have 14 players graded as first round picks. It's like, well, obviously there's going to be, a lot more that go there because of team needs. So I think this is a year where you're going to see a little bit different of a shakeup where you look at a player and go, oh, I didn't think that player was a top 15 guy or a top 20 guy. But based on a team's board, like you think back to that same year with Bijan, Gibbs goes 12th. Was it 12th overall?
Yeah,
Where
12th.
I remember you and I were talking before, and it's like, I think Gibbs is a top 40 pick. And that's where the betting markets moved. And then it's like, I think Gibbs is a first-round pick. I don't think anybody saw that he was a top 15 pick. That was a shock on draft day, especially when they took a linebacker at 18. It's like everybody's board's a little different, and the supply and demand is different. So Genty going in the top 10 is very possible. I don't think it really changes our dynasty outlook. So we'll update that as we move forward. I got some questions this week that said like, well, how big of a gap is it if he drops to this team? It's like, no, he's pretty much going to be the 101 unless he's drafted somewhere to be a backup. Like if he went to Baltimore for some weird reason, you'd be like, I got to wait a little bit, I guess, but still an elite prospect. All right, one more question for you. And this one we're going to get into next week. We're going to preview our wide receiver prospects. But will there be fewer than 5 wide receivers, so 4 or fewer, in the first round of the NFL draft? Fewer than 5 wide receivers.
So we kind of get to cheat here with Travis Hunter going to the combine as a corner. And we're not sure yet exactly how he'll be drafted, but right now a lot of the talk around the league is it's a little easier to take an elite corner than it is to, take a wide receiver. It's harder to find that kind of thing. So a lot of the NFL draft analysts are suggesting maybe teams view him as a corner. He's going to work out first as a corner, and I think he might even work out at the combine as a wide receiver. We'll wait and see. But if you remove him from the equation, it's like a slam dunk. I think there's going to be less than 5. Obviously, you've got McMillan and Burden look like locks to go in the first round. Igbuka is getting a lot of hype at kind of the back of the first. And then I've seen Matthew Golden actually mocked a decent amount, like in the 20s, mid to late 20s as well. So I think there's a good chance you see at least 3, probably 4. I know Trey Harris is also getting some buzz recently. Right now, it doesn't look like he's consensusly, is that even a word? Consensusly?
Today it is. Today it is there.
Mocked in the first round. So he's kind of more of a second round prospect, it looks like. So I would say right now, I would be on like the 65% chance we don't see 5. So I would say somewhere between 3 and 4 is most likely.
It is a tough question because when we line this up against last year, we look at some of those guys that went in the first round. At the very end, we're like, okay, well, Leggett got kind of forced in there at the very end. Pearsall made it into the first round, but is there a very big difference between him and McConkey, who went a couple picks later? It's like there is that end of the first round, beginning of the second round. I know it's different days, and so you can count that in different buckets, but Pearsall, Leggett, Coleman, McConkey, all right there. So
how could you forget Jalen Polk?
He went pick 37. He doesn't even exist in my spreadsheets anymore.
Sad
Poor
times.
Dude. So I think right now my guess would be for Matthew Golden, we'll talk about next week, went from, hey, is this dude in the 5th round to, wow, he's being mocked at like pick 24, 25 in a lot of people's drafts because of what he did in the college football playoffs. So talk about that more. I would say right now, it looks like we're lockstep. We both have 65% of, I don't think there will be 5 or more wide receivers. So it is interesting when we talk about those prospects next week. I'm interested to see the fit of what you think versus what Jason and Mike think. Like, where do they fit in an NFL offense? And then we're kind of putting together a couple puzzle pieces of like, well, this team needs an outside threat, or this team needs a slot wide receiver. And so I think that this player is going to work, because there are years in the NFL draft where we look at certain players and we go, I like this player more, but a team that's ahead of them says like, this is the kind of player I want. Like the Chargers said, I need an outside wide receiver, a big dude. I want Quentin Johnston, where, you see Addison, who's, completely different archetype than him, go a little bit later. So we will have all those rankings updated in the Ultimate Draft Kit Plus. If you want those for our wide receivers, we'll talk about those next week. Let's take a break and let's get into quarterbacks.
Hey, rookie, welcome to the NFL.
All right, we're going to start with the quarterbacks here. And I'm looking at grinding the mocks right now. And as of about a couple days ago, it's like there's only 3 guys being mocked in the first 45 picks. Jalen Milroe is right on that cusp too. and his stock has actually dropped a little bit while Jaxson Dart has gone up. We've seen a pretty consistent last couple of months of Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, kind of back and forth between who's first. Right now, Cam Ward is the favorite at minus 140 in Sportsbook. But before we go into the actual prospect, for fantasy purposes, do you think we will get more than one player who will be a difference maker in Dynasty? That's like my first question.
No, I do not.
That's where I'm at too.
It's tough, man, right? Because like we talked about a little bit at the top, you want these guys to either have an elite rushing ability, which I think if Jalen Milroe makes starts, we'll talk about him, there's definitely some rushing upside to get very excited about. But a lot of the NFL draft consensus is he's more of a project. You know, if he's starting games, it's probably because the starter in front of him got hurt, that sort of thing. So there's not really a ton of projection going on there. And then you look at the other guys on this list, and it's like, man, like they all have issues. And we'll talk about Cam Ward right now, but he's not a perfect prospect by any means. No, there isn't a perfect prospect. Don't get me wrong, but just like comparing it to last year's class again, it's definitely weak. So yeah, I think if one of these guys is a hit from this class, that's kind of what I would expect. They surprise us all the time, of course, but I think right now I'm not high on this class whatsoever.
We'll start with Cam Ward. He's ranked number 1 for all 3 ballers and number 1 on a lot of boards. The journey is interesting, and we have to actually start talking about that. I love doing the deep dive on players, finding out their backstory, just humanizes them more than just saying, here's a ranking. But out of West Columbia, Texas, he was not offered a D1 scholarship. And if you look at his high school team, as a senior, he averaged 12 pass attempts per game. It was a wing T offense, and they didn't really ask him to do that. And now, there are certain teams, like I remember my high school team, like my coach, this was, early 2000s, like, we're going to run the ball. Spoiler alert, we couldn't run the ball at all. And if you have a coach that says we're going to run the ball and you can't do it, then it's really bad. But wasn't offered a D1 scholarship. You do go back, and this is always a sad tale for a lot of players. They attend like the junior days when they're like, I'm going to go to the big college and kind of experience this and then see if they get an offer in the next year. He went to like Texas and Texas A&M and didn't get an offer from any of them. So his only offers were from Texas Southern and Incarnate Word, which is a Catholic school and very, very small. He was at Incarnate Word for 2 years before going to Washington State for 2 years and then Miami. So 3 college stops for Cam Ward. At this point, though, I feel like we can't discredit that, where if you would have told me this 5 years ago, I would say there's something wrong with this player. Nobody transfers this much. It's not a part of the DNA, but in this new world of NIL, it's a little bit more normal. So anything you want to say just about the journey for him? Because this has gone from, like you said, are you even a day 2 pick to, hey, you're going to go number 1 overall potentially?
Right, yeah, and you think about kind of where he was in 2020 to where he is now in 2024 and the high school context, like he really was kind of learning to play quarterback, basically, right? Like handed the ball off a ton in high school and then goes to a small school and it's the COVID year and it's like, okay, then you get past that and now he's a starter and now he's learning NFL or college offenses, and a lot of his background is in kind of these air raid systems. And when you watch him play, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, there's a lot of value too in quarterback experience, I think, especially when the player isn't insanely old. Like Bo Nix had a ton of experience coming out, and some people were like, "Oh, that's a great sign. He'll be ready to go as a rookie." And other people said, "This dude was in college for 9 years. Like, what's going on here, right?" But Nix was older. Cam Ward's only not even 23 years old, right? So like, I kind of value the experience with Cam Ward more than I do with some other prospects because he's not entering the league at 25 or 26 or something crazy. He's still young. And, when I kind of watched him play, like, I definitely saw progression in terms of, like, understanding the scheme and understanding reads and stuff like that across his time in college. So, yeah, I think the experience for him is a plus considering his high school background.
It's tough for me to, like, I don't want to discredit Incarnate Word. I won't say that I've watched all the film from that. No, I have not. It's just like I can take some of the counting statistics that he had, that he's accumulated over 5 years, and it just say, like, I don't care about that. Show me what he did at Washington State, Miami the last 2 years, and you can see how he grew as a passer in 2024. And I think the way that he fits best is the Bruce Arian type downfield passer where you are using his ability to throw the ball vertical. for somebody who was in a wing T offense, you're like, what were they doing with this dude's arm? Because it explodes out of his hand. I won't say that it's like elite. It doesn't have that same like snap where some players it just like comes out. But I will say his arm motion, the fact that he has a lot of unique angles is cool. I will say when you start watching Mahomes and Stafford, you see a lot of quarterbacks try to do the same thing. Like when we get to Shedeur Sanders, very different passer in terms of like consistency and passing motion. I like that he's a gunslinger. I like that he's kind of got this chip on his shoulder. Have you seen that? The last like couple of weeks, he's come out and basically said like, if you pass on me, I will make you die. That's cool. I also think his mechanics are not as clean. And for fantasy, I really don't care. For the NFL, that's a little bit of a red flag for me that it's not exactly what I'd want, but you can make it work. So the gunslinger stuff is cool, and you can put up tons of counting stats in the right system. It just depends on what system he's in.
Yeah, definitely. And one quote I did like, this was from The Athletic. My mentality on the football field is I don't give a, you fill in the blank. And when you watch him play, it's kind of funny because like
two farts.
That's the exact quote. I don't give two farts. When you watch him play, he kind of plays like that. Like he's very casual on every drop back, not like
dude, too chill sometimes.
Yeah, he's just like, I'm going to drop back. I'm going to hang out for a minute. Yeah, I'll drift left. Yeah, I'll drift right. Oh, there's my guy, and I'll spot him and hit him. His clock doesn't get sped up is kind of what I'm saying. He's very cool, calm, and collected. When he does that, though, it's almost like he doesn't set his feet a ton. Like he kind of just rips it from the arm. And I actually think he has great arm strength. I don't know if you and I disagree on that, but like there's throws where he's on the left hash. And in college, remember the hashes are wider. He's on the left hash and he's just throwing it on a rope to the right sideline. So the arm strength to me is not a question whatsoever. I will say he has a little bit of like Caleb-esque playmaking in his game when you watch him. And I'm not saying they're the same quarterback, but when Caleb came out last year, a lot of the conversation is like, man, when he can create, get out of the pocket, push the ball downfield, some of these plays are very special. Cam Ward is not looking to check down, and he will run a little bit, but he's not trying to run. Like he wants to throw it deep. He wants to throw touchdowns. He wants to extend the play and make exciting things happen. And kind of like the conversation for Caleb, if that can work in the NFL, it's going to be great. Like I think there's some really good fantasy upside here, depending on the scheme and depending on how that works. The problem is just generally you can't do that in the NFL. Hold onto the ball for forever and dance around and do those sort of things. But that's how he plays. Throw the ball deep, get out of the pocket and create extended plays. Again, not looking to check it down deep, wants to throw it deep, not looking to check it down, wants to throw it deep, wants to create big plays. And, you know, the stat sheet was insane this year. That's because that's how he plays. He wants to put up numbers.
Yeah, the arm talent's fine. I was saying more of like his mechanics are not there, where he can't just flick the ball the way that some quarterbacks, it like explodes out of their hand. But I think his arm talent's fine. My note was sometimes he seems disinterested after the snap, and the only way to describe it is there's like cool, calm, and collected, which we all said Jaden Daniels was this past year, right? Like just like, man, he just looked unflappable. And then there's Cam Ward, which looks like a disinterested high schooler in the back of class that like wants to go to sleep. So that's fine if that works for you, but it does throw off his footwork sometimes. Iowa State, he got a lot of flack against them because he didn't play the second half in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, which, I mean, come on, it's a Pop-Tarts Bowl, buddy. But in the first half, he was great. He stepped up in the pocket. He does those off-balance throws that we see in Caleb sometimes. You obviously see in Mahomes where it's like you can make that work. I just wonder with players like this, when you're playing hero ball in college, it works. It works in Incarnate Word. It can work when you're at Washington State. And then he put up an awesome year at Miami. Like the competition was even better. But in the NFL, that's how you get more and more turnovers. So there's some game tape that like this is going to work for fantasy. He's going to run in more than enough. He's not going to run like a crazy amount as other players. Like my comp for him is I think he's a flashier Jalen Hurts with a better arm talent, but I don't think he has the same goal line rushing ability. But I think there's enough there. Hurts went 53rd overall. And then my medium comp is I think he's a more athletic Geno Smith.
Interesting. Yeah. Geno, I mean, there's almost no mobility upside rushing. Like I could see it a little bit with Ward. Yeah, I guess just to put a bow on it here, like I could see how his game works. I also could see NFL coaches being very frustrated because when the exciting plays happen, it's awesome. But he's more willing to like throw an interception to risk this deep touchdown pass or exciting sideline play or something than to quote, an NFL coach of like, take the check down, make it easy. Let's just get to second and manageable, like the stuff that NFL coaches want you to do. Like that's not Cam Ward's game. So I'm really interested to see where he goes and kind of how he fits with the head coach, the OC, and that whole thing. What are your thoughts if he does go to the Titans? Obviously, we need free agency to happen and everything, but like, do you like that fit? Do you think it could work? Obviously, the depth chart leaves a lot to be desired, especially at pass catcher right now.
Yeah, it's tough when we talked earlier about everything that makes up a team. It's the weapons, it's the offensive line, it's the system, it's the organization building around you. And the Titans are kind of one of those teams where you go like, man, I feel like there's 3 or 4 different holes here. Like, who is starting for this team at wide receiver in 2 to 3 years?
They don't have that guy on this roster.
They don't. They don't have a tight end on this roster. They don't have a running back on this roster for 2 to 3 years down the road. Not every team has to be built that way, but they certainly aren't at the key pass catching weapons. So I worry about that spot. I really do. Like, I think a really fun team that so we said earlier, he needs an air raid. He needs a system where they say, throw it downfield and you have the options. Then I start going through like the first round. It's like the Raiders are a fun landing spot with Brock Bowers, but I think they're going to want a play action type guy that is willing to not play hero ball the entire time. And I don't think that's that. So any landing spots that you think of that you're like, I mean, the Giants would be fun. Like, I think that would be fun. Is Dable their guy after this year? I don't know.
Yeah, hard to say. Sometimes front offices will give coaching staffs like an extra year if they take a rookie quarterback, because it's like, that's my excuse. We had this rookie, like, let's get him one more year to kind of develop. But yeah, I think a lot of people were surprised that the coaching staff was retained in New York. The GM was retained. But to credit to Joe Schoen, I know he got a lot of flack this past offseason with the Saquon thing and it being on Hard Knocks, which I don't think teams want to do anymore. They had a lot of hits in this draft this past year. Obviously, Malik Neighbors was a home run. But I like Daboll as a play caller still. I know it's been terrible recently. You have Malik Neighbors, obviously not much outside of that, but you've got, in my opinion, a decent play caller and an elite wide receiver. To me, that would be almost more intriguing than landing in Tennessee, where, Tennessee, like, they only have pick 1, pick 35, and then they don't pick in the 3rd round. They have to go all the way to the 4th round. That's why I was saying, like, I could see them trading down just to get more assets because they have so many holes to fill.
I think my favorite landing spot, they'd have to move up from 9 is New Orleans with Kellen Moore.
Yeah, they'd have to give up a ton to go get him, but yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, and they have a lot of other issues with cap and everything else, and we'll see. All right, next name we're going to talk about, Shedeur Sanders. You probably know the name too, from Colorado. All 3 ballers have him ranked at 2. It's interesting because you probably know about the journey from him going with his dad from Jackson State to going to Colorado, also with Travis Hunter. It was rough the first year at Colorado in terms of just the team and the team adjusting, and they were all in the media. Like, there's so many more things to this team than just what is their performance on the field when everybody knows your name and also your dad's the head coach. Like, there's just so much more. Shedeur Sanders, I have as like a late 1st, early 2nd round type grade. He won't go there. But that's where I'm at, like, right now, where I go, there's enough here that's going to work in the NFL. But I think last year he would have gone behind those first 5 or 6 guys and would have been a 2nd round pick, where last year, if you remember, it was Bo Nix, and then we didn't have another quarterback take until Spencer Rattler at pick 150. There's this huge gap, and I think that's where Sanders is, more of like a 2nd round grade.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've kind of gone back and forth on him. Like, when I initially watched him, I was like, I could see some traits that are nice, but he kind of feels like a guy that might go in the first, 12-ish picks just because he's a quarterback and this is a weak class. And I think a lot of the big boards you look at around the NFL, it's like, I've seen him as high as like 5th overall. I've seen him as low as like 40th overall. So I think the general NFL's view of him is pretty split, a lot of mixed opinions. I went back and watched him again these last couple of days just before our show, and I think there's a lot to like as a passer. He is tough. He is accurate. He will stand in the pocket and deliver the football to his guys. And so if he goes to a system where it's like a quick passing type scheme, he doesn't have to hold the ball very long, I think Shedeur can make all the throws. So I'm a big fan of his accuracy and his ability to deliver the ball on time. The problem for me when I watched him was when he is under pressure and drifts back in the pocket and tries to hold onto the ball too long, it goes south really quick. Like takes a lot of negative plays, lots of sacks, not throwing the ball away when you should just live to take another down here. A lot of issues there. Can that be fixed to next level? I'm not sure. A lot of that is coaching, and a lot of that is kind of what you're placed into. But as far as an NFL passer, like I think he's got an NFL arm, and I think he's got the accuracy to succeed if he's in the right spot. So that's where I'm at with Shedeur. The rushing is not really fantasy friendly. At least it wasn't in college. Like he'll scramble and pick up a first down if he has to, but by no means is he going to be a guy that adds to the stat line for fantasy that matters. So a pocket passer is always the case with these guys. They have to have the weapons around them. They have to have the coaching staff around them to put up volume and stats that we care about for fantasy. So I think the ceiling is decently low, but I think there's a good chance if he lands in the right spot that he could stick around the league for a couple of years. We'll see if he develops into a starter.
Feels so conflicted when you look at players like this, because I agree with you. Like I wrote, drifting back in the pocket, running backwards, it compounds bad plays into being just like drive killers. And not just like, oh, you took a sack. It's like, no, you took a sack and you just lost 19 yards. That's terrible stuff. Now it's funny for us who play a game that is very much like, I want big explosive plays, in fantasy football, or, to liken this to video games, you never throw the ball away if you're playing, NCAA or playing Madden. It's like, you're just going to chuck it and do stuff. And then we evaluate players like this and we go, dude, come on, you got to throw the ball away. Like live to, it's like this, we are so conflicted in how we look at players, but I'm totally with you. The bowl game against BYU, there are some third downs where I just wrote, this is a disaster. In the second quarter, he lost a combined 40 yards on 2 plays because he's trying to create and he's not the athlete that's going to outrun. Now, there are some scrambles that are nice. He has the second highest scramble rate of any quarterback in this class. And for those of you that don't know, like scrambles average 7+ yards by quarterbacks in the NFL. If you're between the 20s and you're scrambling the ball, it is gold for fantasy. That's what made Jaden Daniels so great. So he can scramble. He's just not asked to do a lot of design runs. And I worry about him as like a goal line runner. That's like not going to be part of his game. The accuracy and the throws look like they're supposed to. Like that's a really cool thing where you look at Cam Ward and say, you look disinterested. You're trying to throw, this sidearm motion where Shedeur, it's like every single time, it's like 3 steps. This is how a throw is supposed to look. It's a pretty ball. They're consistent most of the time. They're catchable balls. So he needs a quick passing scheme where they utilize his decision-making and they're not asking him to like do anything crazy. I think there's some teams that can work. So I agree with you. I think the floor is fine. I just worry for fantasy. Like, are you going to look back in a couple years like, okay, his best season was QB 14 or something on a season?
For sure. Yeah, I think stuff changes all the time, but like just kind of thinking out a few years, if you get like fringe QB1 numbers, like QB2 superflex type numbers from this rookie pick, I would be super excited about that. Like, I just don't see a high ceiling for fantasy here. So when you're thinking about that relative to the guys we had last year, very different conversation. But the thing that I love most about him, this is per PFF, he had an 82% completion percentage between the numbers. And when you think about like in the NFL, the really fun throws down the sideline for 45 yards or the deep bomb touchdown, like those are awesome for fantasy. We love them. They're super fun. They're going to make the highlight reel. But like coaches care so much about these numbers and the ability to hit the route on time and make an accurate throw. And between the numbers, he was awesome last year. So to his credit, like that's where I think an NFL coach will like him and he can stick around as a starter. Kind of like what we said about CJ Stroud coming out a few years ago is like in the intermediate area between the numbers, he can make those throws. And those are NFL type throws. Now, I'm not saying he's the same prospect. He's definitely not. But just like the floor, I think of like, could he stick around the league as a starter is more what I'm getting at. I think that's there depending on his landing spot. So yeah, I guess I'm a little higher on Shedeur than some other spots I've seen, but by no means is he a perfect prospect.
Yeah, I wrote down like CJ Stroud type, and to be very clear, like shades of this as a point guard. Like you're a point guard on the field where you can distribute in the intermediate areas, and that's what Stroud's been really good at. Now, the worst part of Stroud this year was taking sacks, and Shedeur's been pretty bad in that category. Yes. Like I looked up quarterbacks since 2018 and what was their pressure to sack ratio. So his was 19%. It's the second worst in this class. And then how much of that was the quarterback's responsibility? When you and I were talking about drifting back in the pocket, you're just creating negative plays where you are like, it's one thing if there's an unblocked dude. Like, you can't do anything about that. It happens like every single quarterback. But if you are inviting this and actually going into pressure, 26% of his pressures were actually his responsibility. That's one of the highest in this class. For instance, Caleb was at 30% last year, which is a crazy high rate. Justin Fields was at 28.6. When you start to get up above 20, 25%, it's a character. It is a prospect flaw because you can't just get out of that. A character.
Now you're attacking his character. Jeez, Kyle.
It's a prospect.
What was Shedeur's number in that stat?
26.2%.
That's not great.
Yeah. So I worry, like, that's one of those things that usually aren't corrected at the next level. Now, there are certain guys. Josh Allen went from like wild man and wild under pressure to now he's like unsackable. And maybe we just say he's a different dude. But like Mahomes is one of those players where it did translate, where like he wasn't sacked a ton, you know, in terms of his pressure rate, he's been awesome at it. Baker's one of those prospects that in college, his pressure to sack and his responsibility was high, and it was super high this past year. Despite Baker having a great year at Tampa Bay, he took a lot of sacks. A lot of them was his own issue. But as a passer, I think he can be an efficient passer and can be a QB2 for fantasy. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I just feel like I want in my Superflex draft, if I'm taking a guy, let's say he goes to the Raiders. A lot of people are connecting that. He goes 106 to the Raiders. Where should he go in Superflex rookie drafts?
I mean, I would obviously still have Genty above him. Depending on where Ward goes, I'd probably still have Ward.
Would go ahead of him.
Yeah. I mean, depending on Hampton and Caleb Johnson, where those guys go, like Tyler Warren is going to be a first-round pick. Yeah. I still think he'd probably slide to like the mid to back of the first round, even with that type of draft capital and landing spot. And maybe some people, you know, they play Superflex differently. Some people value quarterbacks insanely high, and that's fine if that's your thing. But for us, I don't think that we're there on him specifically of being like a difference maker. I'd still much rather have some of the other skill guys.
Yeah, and I'd be interested. I like the Raiders are a fun landing spot. They still got to work out the running game. That was the worst in the NFL this past year. But yeah, I mean, like, let's say if he did that like 107, 108, feels late compared to usually where you'd be taking those guys, you know, in the past year. So I think overall we see what can work, and yet like sacks are going to compound. And
if you keep time to throw less than like 2.9 seconds for him, I think he's going to work. I think he's going to work in the NFL. We'll see.
Just like tell the refs ahead of time, like, hey, just so you know, this is like what we're going to change for this game only because of our quarterback. Like, we're not letting him running around. Like, just throw it away immediately.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll get to some other quarterbacks. All right, we're back. Next prospect we're going to talk about is Ole Miss's Jaxson Dart, who somehow in our circles of fantasy footballers has become like my dude. And I just want to be on the record of saying the only comment that I made in here is I think Jaxson Dart could be a first-round pick. He has kind of some interesting stats. And then Mike made him be my guy for this draft. I wouldn't say that. I just think that there's some intriguing ceiling things here for Jaxson Dart, who started at USC. He was the Max Preps National Player of the Year out of high school. Like, not just like for his state, but for all of high school. So he came in as a big-time prospect, went to USC, transferred because Caleb Williams went there. And at Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin, he had a pretty successful college career in the SEC, even a big win over Georgia this past year. 4,200 yards, 29 passing touchdowns, and then also runs a little bit more than you think. He has the highest scramble rate of any quarterback in this class. 9% of his dropbacks turned into scrambles. We love that for fantasy, and that does translate at the next level. So a lot of things here. He's the youngest in the class. He has a young breakout age. All of these things look great. I have to start off by asking the question, is this a bad system for the NFL? Like Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, I can't take their stats like we did with Tennessee. Last week we talked about Dylan Sampson. I feel like this is one of those teams we have to contextualize.
Definitely. He's not really asked in the system to read the defense. It's very play action, RPO type of stuff where it's like, when the read is there, just throw it. And when he has to hold onto the ball and like make progressions through the defense, it kind of turns into a disaster pretty quickly. A lot of times, like, just doesn't see the linebacker that was faking a blitz drop back, and he's just gonna throw a pick six. Like in the NFL, these are pick sixes all the time. But when the system is working as it should, where it's a quick throw, get the ball out, he has the arm talent to make really impressive throws. Like specifically when he can kind of layer it over the linebacker, but like in front of the safety, his touch is awesome. A couple of times on like a wheel route to a running back on the sideline, perfectly placed ball over the linebacker. He can make some of those throws. Now, as a deep ball passer, it's not good. I don't know if he has the arm strength. Like the ball kind of flutters. It's often underthrown.
It's a character flaw.
It's a character flaw. Yeah, he's got to look in the mirror on this one. Come on, Jaxson. But not a great deep ball thrower. Like Cam Ward has a very live arm down the field. We'll talk about Milroe in a second. He can chuck it. Like that's not Dart's game. But as the guy who can deliver the ball in intermediate areas, he can. The problem is, and the question I have is just like, where is he at in terms of his ability to read the defense? And I think that's going to be a lot of questions for NFL teams throughout the next several weeks, like the NFL Combine and that sort of thing, is understanding his ability to read NFL coverages, because he wasn't really asked to do that at Ole Miss. So the stats look great. The age is good. Early breakout age, like all those things look awesome. The scrambling is there. So there's a lot of things that I could say, like in his profile, I'm pretty excited about these factors, but I definitely have questions of like, is he actually going to be able to do this in the NFL? And that's just a complete unknown right now.
Just to put some numbers, you were mentioning about, it's a lot of play action, a lot of RPO stuff. Like 53% of his dropbacks were play action. And
that's insane.
You go back to last year's class. Like Caleb was pretty high at 38%, Bo Nix 36%. Jane Daniels was only at 17% LSU, which was actually a red flag. It's like, is he going to be able to do this in the same way in the NFL? Yes, he can do that. The NFL average last year was 26% of dropbacks were play action. So he doubled it this past year. So when you look at Ole Miss and you watch their film, there's just a lot of open wide receivers to the point where you're going, this isn't like him anticipating a lot of things. You're just kind of like, this dude's open. It's going to make me question when we talk about Trey Harris next week. It's like, okay, how much of this production was him, the scheme, and then what translates to the NFL? So I think we have a lot of question with Jaxson Dart of what works. I think the physical skills of a guy who is big enough and runs enough makes me go, okay, I'm kind of intrigued for fantasy. Like, I think this is somebody who can work. I don't think he's an elite prospect by any means. I think if he would have gone in the draft last year, he would have gone 3rd or 4th round. But based on the need, he's getting some late 1st round buzz, maybe some 2nd round buzz. That's kind of where he's at. But there's a lot of flaws here as just a processor of the field that when you go to the next level, you just can't sustain starts long term. Like one of my high end comps, this is nice. A high end comp here, Betz, is Carson Wentz with less size and not the same arm strength.
Which version?
That's the thing, is like you've seen the best parts of Carson Wentz, especially in RPO systems where it worked and he had an MVP caliber season. Now, I don't think Dart's that. And then you also seen the worst sides of Carson Wentz where he was on, 4 teams in 4 years.
Right. Yeah, I think he's a guy that, at least right now, at this part of the process, he profiles as a guy that's like, kind of needs to see the guy open to throw it first, not really like an anticipatory thrower. In the NFL, the game speeds up. It gets a lot harder to do that. So that's our big question on him. I think, like I said, and like you mentioned, the scrambling is good. He produced at an SEC school, faced a ton of tough defenses to his credit, was number 1 in the class in yards per attempt against those tough defenses. So there's a lot that I'm like, yeah, I could see this. But then there's also like the NFL draft question is like, does this guy even go in the 1st round? The hit rate on 2nd round or later rookie quarterbacks is obviously abysmal. So lots of ways this could go, but I think we're keeping the light on for him for fantasy if he gets starts. I'm not sure if he'll start in his rookie year at all, but I think if he gets on the field, if he runs enough, like we could care for fantasy kind of thing. But a lot to like, a lot to question for sure on Dart. I think he's a guy that could go anywhere from the late first to like back of the second, and I wouldn't be surprised on any of that.
Yeah, I watched the film against Georgia where he gets a good win. I just didn't walk away thinking that he was settled at all. Like, he was used on some QB draws, which are nice for fantasy, but it just wasn't a clean game. There's another game against Kentucky. I just feel like pressure-wise, he didn't see it.
That was rough. Yeah, I agree.
So those are the things that are tough. And then I watched the Senior Bowl. It was a mixed bag. Like, on the first drive, I was like, oh, he's cooking. Like, he's going to get some buzz from this. This is great for him. His next couple of drives were just a complete mixed bag. He was unaware of pressure. He, a couple like just ugly plays. So I don't know. Play to play, I feel like I wish that there was more consistency. And so I'm not going to be bullish on this player if the NFL is not bullish on him. But if he gets second round draft capital, then in my Superflex draft, I go, okay, I see where this could work, and maybe I could see a path for him. But yeah, I'm not planting a flag on Jaxson Dart. Let Mike know that all the way from Las Vegas.
I mean, that's my guy this year, Jaxson Dart. Wouldn't it be hilarious if your my guy was like a backup quarterback?
You're just calling for an injury?
Yeah, exactly.
Just throwing it out there. This next guy is a guy that I really like for a long time. It's Jalen Milroe, quarterback for Alabama. Spoiler alert, my family's Alabama fans, so I've watched a lot of Jalen Milroe film. It's just really fun when you have a player who looks like he could beat everybody else up, and he's your quarterback. Like, the whole time, you're just like, this dude, his muscles are just so ripped that when he throws the ball, you feel like he's going to bust the ball with his bare hands. Jalen Milroe took a little while behind Bryce Young, but he was right behind Jaxson Dart in that 2021 class coming out. So it's like they were right there, and it's interesting that they're basically back-to-back in a lot of people's rankings of big boards. He comes from a military family. In all his interviews, everything else, it's like, this dude's mature. Also, this is a fun fact. Him and Terrion Arnold, the cornerback for the Lions, they have a clothing line called Lank. Let all the naysayers know. Have you bought yet?
Now that I know this, I'm about to.
Shout out to Lank right here.
Been a long-time sponsor. We had to bring him on for the 100th episode. How much do you think they're charging for ads these days?
I'll look it up right now as you go into it. Like, I mean, maybe mid-show I'm going to buy myself like a tank or something.
I would love it. Yeah, Milroe, obviously for fantasy, this is a fantasy show, has the tools that you get excited about. Dude can run, and he can chuck it deep. Now, there's a lot of issues in between there for this type of guy. The accuracy leaves a lot to be desired, especially in the short to intermediate areas of the field. And under pressure, it's not good. From clean pocket, he was actually really good this past year, 9.5 YPA, PFF grade of 90.2. Under pressure, that drops to 51.6 grade and 6.6 YPA. So that's a big question mark for me when you look at how he projects to the next level. And then the other thing on Milroe that I think is super interesting to discuss, and we talk about this in the NFL all the time, is like when these guys change systems and coaching staffs, it's hard to do. Like, you need kind of consistency at the NFL level to be successful. Obviously, Nick Saban retires. You bring in Kellen DeBoer. Like, his scramble rate went way down as a senior this past year, but his design rushes went up. And they kind of asked him to be more of a design runner and stay in the pocket as a thrower. And I don't think that that's necessarily what you want to force Milroe to do. Like, if I was a coaching staff, I'd want to use his mobility and kind of let him create and be a guy that is a difference maker for you, because he is just that athletic. He is that good as far as a playmaker. But as an NFL passer, that's where I think teams have a lot of question marks about him. Lots of turnover worthy plays in the middle of the field, stuff like that. So the upside's exciting for fantasy if he's going to run, but there definitely is question marks of like, how many games is this dude going to start? Not just in year one, but like in the NFL period is kind of a question mark. So yeah, exciting if he gets a chance. We'll see if he does.
He needs an NFL team that gets the vision of what this player is. Like, oh, you're in a power run scheme that you can clearly pull the ball down if you want to. And then you have outside threats, because I think we would both say outside the numbers, like, he can be effective. Now, middle of the field is still a major work in progress. I'm not going to say anything, but I just wrote down, when you have a player like this, it's a really fun video game. I just said muscle throwing is fun because you can just pull it down and run the ball, or, hey, go run a 9 route and I'm going to chuck it deep. He often waits for wide receivers to get open and to complete their routes, which at the end of the day, that doesn't translate all the time to the NFL. He also struggled inside the red zone. Like he completed under 50% of his passes. So I think there's a lot that you would go like, oh man, I don't know how this is going to work as a thrower. But as a runner for fantasy, when he does a QB sweep, he's not one of those running backs that just bowl ahead. Like he knows how to knife through defenses.
Whoa. You're already calling him a running back? This guy hasn't even been drafted yet, and you're telling me he has to change positions. Kyle, you're the big media. You probably wanted Lamar Jackson to become a running back too, didn't you?
No, dude. I wanted to play video games. That's what I wanted to do. I do think that pulling the ball down, though, feels like plan A sometimes. Yeah. And like I said, it's fun for the game we play. I don't know if that works for the NFL. So, there are certain players that work. Like Baltimore got a vision of this player that was viewed as a runner first by a lot of the league. And they said, hey, he's not perfect. And you've seen how Lamar has progressed as he can read defenses. And like Lamar is one of those players that when he flicks the ball, it just goes. He's still more of a thrower because he's got the muscles. So I will take the gamble in wherever he goes, if he goes to the right landing spot, and just say, like, who knows? Because Jalen Hurts was one of those players that was taken in the second round, and we all said, okay, well, they have Carson Wentz. Who cares about this player? But the rushing upside was so good that who cares if he turns into nothing? Like Jalen Hurts was a third-round pick in rookie drafts that year, maybe even undrafted by some people. And Jalen Milroe is one of those players you could do the same thing. Just depends on the landing spot.
Yeah, for sure. He's the type of guy that, like, I would not be surprised if this doesn't work. But if you have him on, like, if you've got like a 25 or 30 man roster, Dynasty League or a taxi squad or something, and he gets put in for a handful of starts, if let's say he's on a bad team and they're like, let's just see what we got in the kid for the last 6 weeks of the season, like, I'm going to be excited to start him because he can run and he's going to run. And so for fantasy, for our game, I actually kind of love him as like a late second round superflex pick or third round single quarterback pick of just like, I don't know how many starts I'm going to get out of this guy, but I know that when he's in there, they will be valuable for us for fantasy. So that's the take home with Milroe is, lots of questions on his NFL future, but when he will be on the field, I think he'll give us fantasy numbers, and that's what we care about, right? So that's where I'm at with Milroe. Definitely a lot to think about, though, with him over the next couple of weeks in terms of his draft capital. I've seen second round, I've seen third round, I've seen almost no first round buzz. That can change, we'll see, but that's kind of what we're projecting right now. I will say, I want to ask your opinion on this. I've seen a lot of comps, and I don't know if this is a lazy comp from other people on like, oh, this guy's just Anthony Richardson. And I can understand where they're coming from of like, he's got the exciting rushing ability. He's very athletic, but like, I think he's at least a functional passer. I don't know where you're at with that, where Richardson coming out, obviously, and we've seen this, cannot throw the football whatsoever. I think Milroe's at least a functional passer. Where are you at with that?
Yeah. I mean, Milroe had 2 seasons. So one, you get way more starts here. It's really, 27 starts where he actually is in a system that produces pro level players. Yeah. I think Milroe's I won't say he's like ahead. I don't think he has the same ceiling. He's not going to test the exact same way, but no, I think it's a lazy comp. Like, don't give Lamar's on his own thing. Like, but what Baltimore did do is they had this run first quarterback from college that was functional enough as a passer to back up, and his name was Tyler Huntley, Pro Bowler Tyler Huntley.
Never forget.
And I think Milroe is just like a bigger, more muscular version of that, which doesn't sound very kind, but like at the end of the day, like Tyler Huntley was a starting quarterback in the NFL that stuck around long enough and made some starts this year. And I don't think there's the same boom bust that Anthony Richards had. I think Milroe can be a functional player in the NFL for multiple years. He's also going to interview, like, you're just cue the interview talk that says this guy tested so well, teams are in love with him. That's going to come up a lot too.
Definitely. And just for context around Richardson's last year at Florida, he was completing 53% of his passes. That is not even functional at any level of football. Milroe this past year, 64% at Alabama. So just a point, I think if you hear that comp or you see that, I don't think that I buy into that quite as much.
Also, this is my little rant. You hear this from me. Betz gets a lot of stuff. Like, my wife gets stuff from me, but Betz gets also this other side of like sports rants from me. Anytime you hear a team that says like, we're in love with this player, just throw it in the garbage.
Everybody's in love with everybody. It's a great time of year, Kyle.
It's a good reminder to say that these teams have there's nothing to gain from publicly saying you like a player and you're at pick 20. How do you know this player is going to be on the board? You have no idea what this other team. There's so much like espionage right now and propaganda. I like it. I like that part of this game. But
it's only going to get worse over the next 2 months.
A couple years ago, I can't remember if I shared this story, but I saw somebody from an unnamed team, like a reporter, put out something like, "Oh, this team loves Mo Alley Cox," and I had done some like deep dive into Mo Alley Cox, and he's now like a joke for the footballers. But when he was a prospect coming out, it's like, this dude's different than everybody else, but it's like this team loves him. They're really thinking about him at pick like 80 whatever. And I'm like, how is this possible that you just need something to write about, man? There's literally, they could have said one thing in a meeting. It's like, oh yeah, we looked at some tight ends today. Mo Alley Cox ran really well. It's like, dude, you have no idea if this dude's going to be on the board a couple days from now. Like, it's just not going to happen. So
I would love if a GM came out and they asked him about a player and he's like, I hate that guy. Like, if it's just straight up like, we're not drafting him. That would be so refreshing because, like you said, everybody loves everybody and everybody's the best prospect right now. And yeah, you'll hear a lot of that over the next couple of weeks, especially after the combine. That's when it really starts to heat up.
Yeah, that's what all the teams did last year. They essentially said, we don't like Spencer Rattler. And I don't blame him because he's a turd. Sorry. All right. So those are the top 4 quarterbacks, and we spent the most amount of time because we think those are the ones that are going to affect Dynasty fantasy football that you're going to see in your drafts. There are some deeper names, and we'll have them in our ranking. Quinn Ewers of Texas, Will Howard of Ohio State, Dylan Gabriel of Oregon, Kyle McCord of Syracuse. All of those dudes right now are being mocked in the top 150. I don't really have interest in talking about guys after that. But any quick notes you want to say on some of these dudes, like Ewers is one of those players that was 5-star, the number 1 overall recruit, and has basically just slowly but surely like lost that shine, where there are lots of players that's happened. Like Rattler was one of those dudes, number 1 coming out. Sam Howell was one of those dudes. Rattler and Howell were once mocked to go number 1 overall in betting markets for the draft. And I think this is another one of those players. He's still young. He's a 3-year starter. He held off Arch Manning somehow, the richest man that's not playing college football, Arch Manning. And yet it's a train wreck if we're going to talk about translating to the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, what we care about, not going to run, takes a ton of pressure. That is his own fault. Pressure to sack ratio extremely high. His quarterback pressure rate very, very high. I think people know him because of the name and the pedigree of coming out of high school. But when you see a guy that trends in the wrong direction for basically 3 years straight, obviously you're wish casting that this is going to turn around soon. I think a team will take him probably in the 3rd round, maybe late 2nd if someone really wants him, but like 3rd round, maybe 4th round, and just kind of sit him on the depth chart and maybe try to develop him. So fine as a late round dart in a rookie draft, but like certainly not draftable in 1 quarterback leagues. For Quinn Ewers, I think Howard is a guy people know because they just won the national championship. But I think a lot of people are questioning like his true talent in the NFL level. He's got the size. He runs a little bit. Like, that's at least intriguing. But a guy, again, that probably won't go in the top 2 rounds. So the hit rate here on these guys that go 3rd round or later is extremely low. Not just in the NFL, but like for fantasy. So all these guys, Ewers, Howard, Gabriel, McCord, they're all darts, and you wait and see.
Yeah, the number of quarterbacks over the last real decade, I think is since Dak's year, that were round 4 or later that made 10 starts as a rookie. It was Dak, Gardner Minshew, and Aiden O'Connell. The boys, all right? It's like those are the smallest small that even make starts, and then Dak's the only one that's like the true success story, and then you can start going to Brock Purdy and all those other guys, but they didn't make all those starts. They just kind of got thrust into a situation. Howard, I think, is underrated as a runner. And when I describe these players, like, think of Sam Darnold. He ran for 212 yards this past year. You wouldn't say that was like in his bag, but a couple years ago, he had a little run for the Panthers where he was scoring rushing touchdowns. He's big enough to pick up some yards. Like, Howard's interesting, I think, for fantasy of the group right here. He'd be the one that I would put my money on just from his draft stock. He broke CJ Stroud's completion record at Ohio State. It also helps having the best wide receivers on the planet. So that adds to it. Ewers, if I had to give a comp, he's like he's the diet RC Cola version of Baker Mayfield.
That is not a great comp.
I know. It's basically like I'm not buying it, but I understand why it's on the shelves, I guess.
I don't know where you came up with that, but it's a good one.
Yep, that's where he's at. And then Dylan Gabriel, the dude just loved college, 64 starts, UCF, Oklahoma, Oregon. Dude, this dude has played so long. Like, he was in the same class as like Garrett Wilson coming out of college
That's
or coming out of high school. So
That
Garrett
is
Wilson
insane.
just finished his third year in the NFL.
That is insane. 64 starts. I mean, he's got experience.
The experience is experience, and 155 career touchdown passes is a lot. He doesn't have the arm strength. The left-handed thing is going to be... There's some teams who just don't even want to deal with a left-handed prospect. Just keep that in mind. We play video games. We play fantasy football. There are real NFL teams that say, like, I do not want to change our scheme. He's off our board. I don't care about him. He's a low-ceiling prospect. There are other teams that have left-handed quarterbacks, like the Dolphins, that kind of work as like a timing-based West Coast offense, and it makes sense as a direct backup. Like, why would you create your system for a left-handed quarterback like Tua and then have to change all your protections and change everything else? So he gets a little bit of a bump if he goes there because we think Miami can be fantasy-friendly. I also think the Raiders are interesting if it's a late-round prospect. You know, he's not going to come out and start right away, but he has experience. He could probably step in. He just needs the right system.
Yeah, that's well said.
Yeah. Miami's the fun one because he's a left-handed quarterback. There is another team that has a left-handed quarterback, and we might need a backup when we trade Kirk Cousins for the world.
2 lefties in the league. That's a good trivia question for you, Kyle, or good research. When is the last time we had 2 left-handed starters in the NFL?
Man, I'm going to do that research after the show. There's somebody listening right now that's yelling at me. It's like, oh, it was, Cade McNown and all these other left-handed quarterbacks. I don't know. I'll have to think on it. Kyle McCord of Syracuse has moved up some boards recently. He was Marvin Harrison Jr.'s high school teammate. And if you follow like the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, he was kind of picked ahead of J.J. McCarthy in that recruiting class. Like Ryan Day said, like, I want Kyle McCord. And then J.J. McCarthy, who grew up an Ohio State fan, said, fine, screw you guys. I'm going to Michigan, wins a natty. Kyle McCord transfers, goes to Syracuse, sets the ACC record for single season passing yards. He's a shotgun dude who doesn't run. So, cool. He's a late round NFL prospect, but with zero ceiling if he doesn't run.
Yep. I think that's well said.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, these 4 guys at the end, Ewers, Howard, Gabriel, McCord, would you say Howard's the one that's kind of the most intriguing? Not saying you're bullish, but intriguing?
Yeah, just because I know that he can run. Again, not like the most insanely athletic player and not the most insanely skilled runner, but can do it and willing to do it. And when you're looking at this range, like that's literally all I care about because the projection here from the NFL standpoint is obviously not great. So yeah, I think of these 4, Ewers, Howard, Gabriel, and McCord, he's the guy that I would say, like, if I'm going to throw a dart super late in my rookie draft, he'd be the guy that I hope gets some starts and I hope he's going to run.
And just for those people that really want to know, I circled back and I looked up the lankstore.com. Shout out to the Lank Store, Jalen Milroe's store. And,
is that the actual URL, the Lank Store?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they'd probably get at least 5 more hits from this podcast alone. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's, kind of looks like the Nike like font with like a period at the end, it just says Lank. I don't know if I was like on the street, obviously in my neighborhood, like what people would think of me. Like, what is that?
If you're wearing this?
Yeah.
I think it'd be a good conversation starter.
That's true. That I need to let all the naysayers know. Just
That's
like
right.
That's what I carry around with me every single day. Is like, oh man, there's so many people that are just naysaying me. And I want to let you guys know right now.
It's kind of cool. They have the A as the Alabama A. I kind of like it.
Okay. Well, maybe you can put a little order there. Maybe we can ask Terry and Arnold, friend of the show.
Dude, these t-shirts are $46. I'm not paying $46 for a t-shirt.
Use coupon code BETS to save nothing.
Their visor is $48.99. This is, guys, you're not going to sell anything. This is ridiculous. You need $20 t-shirts. like every other company, are $30 t-shirts. This is ridiculous.
Dude, 2025, like, it's so sad when you think about, like, oh, that's really cool. Like, I'm a hat guy. I've always liked hats. And over the course of time, it's like, I'm going to end up paying $35, $40 for a hat every single time?
I know, man. We're so old now. All we're talking about is inflation.
That's where things are at. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Next week, we will be back talking wide receivers. Make sure you check out ultimatedraftkit.com. You can see all of our rookie profiles, our rookie mocks. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Footballers Dynasty Podcast. If you want to take your dynasty skills to the next level, check out thefantasyfootballers.com.